Welcome. In this video, we're going to take a look at Quick Loader module in Brobench. This module was introduced in version 4.8 and it is included in Essential and Above editions. Brobench has a lot of capability when it comes to querying data, bulk editing the data, or a single record editing and other use cases. For example, let's say if you want to edit some of the data in the opportunity, you can query the data with any condition that you want, go to the edit mode, and then you can make bulk changes with the various cases. Okay, and then you can go ahead and save the changes. So this would work fine if you want to bulk edit the data which is available in SFDC. However, if the data is not in SFDC and you want to import it, then this particular option is not going to work out. So that is where the Quick Loader module would be helpful. To access the Quick Loader module, so click on this, the app menu, go to the modules, and then go to Quick Loader. So keep in mind that the quick refers to the easy configuration or less configuration, not necessarily the performance of loading the data, because that mainly depends on your org and other additional triggers that you have defined and parallel connections, whole bunch of other factors. So let's take a look at how the UI is and what are the different elements. So we have some controls at the top, and then we have some input grid that's going to show up here. So typical use case is that you select a file, and based on the file, we automatically configure object and then action, as well as a field mapping. But of course, which you can go and change it, both actions, the object action, as well as the field mapping. Once you do, go ahead and update the save options and then run import. Okay, so let's go select a file. When you click on the open input file, it will come up with this dialog. It provides you the option to select a particular file from your desktop or enter the content from the clipboard. We support CSV, comma separated values, the tab separated values, JSON, as well as the Excel files. And Excel, it has to be .xlx format. We don't support the old 97 version XLS format. And then you can copy and paste the data in a CSV, TSV, as well as the JSON format. So keep in mind, if you have a lot of data, selecting a file is going to be more optimized than copying and pasting that. Okay. So let's go and select a file, for example, and keep in mind when you select a file in Excel file, and if Excel file contains multiple sheets, the app will prompt you to select one of the sheets. For example, if you go and choose a sheet, so now there are 2 sheets in that, so it's prompt you and say, hey, go and select a particular sheet that you want to use it. For example, let's go and select a CSV file. Okay, so when you select a file, if it is CSV, JSON, or a TSV, other single sheet, or if an Excel that contains only a single sheet, the data is automatically loaded, initialized, and loaded into the grid. So once the data is loaded, you can go and select an object. By default, we select an object if it contains an ID field, and if you can determine what is the object based on the key ID prefix. We also select an update, the action based on if the ID is there or not. So if ID is not there, we select insert, but if it is there, it's an update. Of course, if you're trying to delete, obviously it would be marked as update, so you can go and change to other operations. So keep in mind this particular list of actions, there are total 6 actions I can do: insert, update, upsert, delete, delete hard, and undelete. They solely depends on the type of the object that you have selected and what operation they supported. For example, you can go and select custom metadata, which we support to update the custom metadata from within here. And custom metadata supports only upsert and then delete operations. So similarly, there may be an object that supports only create, right? So you can based on those options, that list will be shown. Okay, so if you select an upsert, then you would expect to select an upsert ID field. Okay, upsert field, which is defined as an external ID field in that particular object. And for custom metadata, it's hard coded to be developer name because you can't change that. However, if you select different object, then you have an option to select either ID or some other custom external ID field that you might have defined. So let's go change to the update. Okay. So next up, so we have selected object and we have selected what action that you're going to take on this particular data. So next up, you can select field mapping. So you notice that based on the input file and then the field object that is selected, we already auto map some of the fields. Okay, so we auto map based on the loose mapping, the from exact mapping, a little bit of a loose mapping and all that. And then you can go and make changes. So you also notice that in the particular grid, when you do the mapping, some column is highlighted in a grayed out format. So that is that means that particular column is not mapped. Okay, so every other columns are mapped and that one is not. Okay. So let's go to the field mapping. So if you go to the field mapping, it shows all the mappings that are currently defined. So in the toolbar, we have some actions. So you can use this one to create a new entries. You can use this delete menu option to delete some of the entries. You can delete all entries or a source blank and whatever. You can search for a particular entry. For example, let's say I want to search for SLA. It will show that particular item. Or you can also filter by various things. For example, let's say I want to see all the pick list values that are mapped, or maybe reference field. In this case, none are mapped yet. So you can select that. Okay. So if we come to the columns, so we have this. It shows the number of the input, the row, the other mapping row number, because sometimes in the error that we want to indicate, hey, there is a mapping error in this particular row. So we show this ID. It will become easy for you to correlate. You can click on this to edit this field in a more detailed way. For example, depending on what options are available, it shows ID lookup or source format, default value, and all that. So default value field is used to set a default value for a field with or without a source field mapping. For example, let's say we are trying to map account source. What if there is no input in the account source, right? In that case, you would want to say, default to channel. Okay. So in that case, if there is no input value coming from the field input data, then it will be defaulted to channel value. And you can use it. You can use that particular field to set a default value even without a mapping. For example, let's say I want to populate some value. For example, let's say billing country. I want to populate to US. So now we can say US. Even though there is no field mapping, the value will be hard coded to US. The source format, you can use that to format a date and time field. For example, let's say we have SLA expiration date, and then if the Salesforce expects the date to be in ISO 8601 format, but for whatever reason, if you are not getting the data in that format, let's say you get the data like this, January 10th, 2020. So that is not the date that you can save into SFDC directly. You have to reformat it. So this is where you can specify the format with which we will parse that particular data. So in this case, to parse this data, this one, so you would use MMM, okay, so D and then Y. Okay, so this particular format is a standard tokens called formatting tokens is used in Java and a lot of other languages, and we have a function in the formulas called a parse date. So if you go here, you will be able to see the details of that particular how to parse it. Okay, for example, here if you look for a parse date function, and if you go beneath that, we have a parse tokens, which we have a whole bunch of token support, and then with which you can parse it. If you want to try it out, how the formula behaves, you can also use this formula playground, which will bring up the playground where you can try out various operations. For example, let's say parse date, it has, let's say this is the date that you want to parse, and then you can specify the format token. Okay, so now you can see that it is parsed as this. Okay, so make sure that if you're trying to evaluate some formula for a Brobench, make sure that it is version 2 which is selected, not the version 1. Okay, so you can specify the source formula. So in this case, we're going to cancel it because we don't have any data at this time. Okay. So you can see that there is an active column. So the the field mapping will be used only if the active flag is checked. You can use these to, for example, temporarily, not to use a particular mapping with some configuration notes and whatever that you have defined. So you can use that. You don't have to delete it. You can just inactivate it and run the import. So that particular mapping will not be done. Okay. So regarding the Boolean fields, we recognize various values. So if it is no, or if it is a yes, if it is a number anything greater than 0, or any kind of a other non-string, or a string other values, so we'll treat that as true, everything else as false. Okay, for example, if you type no in the input, that will become false, or if you type 0, that will become false, or if you type false, that will become false. Everything else will convert as a true. You also notice that we wanna map the parent account key, but if you look at the data, it is not the ID that we are getting. We are getting some external ID field, right? So now, how do you look up the parent account? So you can do that using external ID field. So let's go and select the parent ID as the field that we want to map to. Now, if you go here, it shows an additional option called the value lookup configuration. You can select an external ID, and then it shows all the available external IDs, and then you can choose one of them. Because in this case, there's only one external ID, so that has been selected by default. But if there are multiple, it will prompt you to select one. So when you select it, you see this particular column shows an external ID, so to indicate that this particular field mapping has an external ID mapped. So you get a glimpse of the whole mapping in one view. Okay, so you can also sort the fields. Let's say you have inactivated somewhere. You can click here to sort them so that you can see, you can bring all the inactivated to the top if you want to, or you can sort by the source field or a target field, or even if you have an ID lookup if they are there. Okay, so once you're happy with mapping, so let's go on shipping street. So let's go and set that. Not sure why it is not mapped. Okay, keep in mind you can map the same field to multiple fields, the same source field into multiple target fields, but of course you can't map multiple target fields against the same source field, right? So you can use the one target field once only, otherwise you'll get an error. For example, let's say if you go and select account number, which you've already mapped, and when you click on validate, it will give an error and say, hey, field mapping has an error, please review the mapping. Okay, in this, okay. So we can delete this field, and then if you validate, it should be good. Okay, so let's go and save it. And so we are happy with this particular field mapping. So looks like the name field, okay, yeah, is inactive. That's why it was showing gray. Okay, so name field is mapped. Okay, so it all looks good. So another thing is that we have to pay attention to the blank values or null values. So by default, Brobench doesn't save the null values, and if data has a null value or a blank value and try to save it, it will give an error. That particular record error is marked as an error. But of course, you can change that behavior. So click on the save options, and here you can save. If there's a blank value, what you want to do with that? You want to skip it. It means that ignore the fields where there's a blank value and save the rest of the fields, or you can say save them so that it will nullify the existing data which is there in Salesforce. Okay, so we try to err on the caution of not losing any data. So, and also at the same time giving you a heads up that, hey, you have done a wrong mapping or maybe some configuration that you have to look at. So it defaults to error. So when you try to save it, it will give an error, and we'll see that how to handle that. Okay, so let's go and save it. So now if you try to run an update, and it will prompt you to confirm the changes that you're going to save. In this case, we are making 14 updates to account object. We are saving as this particular user, and you can expand the save options, and you have some options that you can control. For example, you can specify the batch size, you can change the write delay. So for before each batch, after each batch, and before writing the next batch, we pass that many milliseconds. You can use it for various cases, and the blank values, of course. And if you want to run multiple threads, you can use the threads, and then other assignment values. Go check out the help. We have a lot of help there to understand what those options are. Okay, this particular option can be used to try out some sample records. For example, let's say you've done the mapping and you want to see if one or two records go through. Keep in mind that it still saves that many records to SFDC. So if you have any data that you're going to lose, keep that in mind. Okay, so let's say we go and specify one that I want to try out one record, and then let's go from there. Okay, so looks like there are some mapping errors. Okay, so it is telling that the parent ID field has a blank value. It is giving an error that, hey, you're trying to load a blank value, but you haven't enabled to save the blank. So you can go to the save options, and then you can skip or you can save. So that particular error should go away. Okay, so if you go and run an update one more time, you are trying to do one update because we have a sample record of one. Okay, and then click save it. Okay, it's gonna save that. Okay, because those were the error that came earlier. So it tried to save the first record and then it is giving some error. So let's go take a look at what is that. Clear value, clear clean status. Okay, so now coming to this particular error handling in the input grid, we were trying to simulate some error condition here with invalid value. So that is how the error will be shown. Now I can correct it. For example, I can correct the data and then I can click on update, and again it will do one sample record. Okay, so in this case you see that it has updated one record, the rest of them are still in error mode. Okay, so now I can go do the full update. So let's say I remove this, then I'm trying to skip the blank values and then go save it. So now it should actually continue and save rest of the records, and then but there is a one other record here, it failed. So it's because we have a date which is Jan 20th 2024, which is not a valid format, for example here. So I can go and change it to, for example, let's say this is 01 20 24 01 20. Okay, so that is a format, and then if you run update last time, it should get saved, that one. Okay, so for each time updated, you see that it keeps track of what records are updated. Okay, so then if there are any errors, it'll add a retry as a label, so you know that, hey, there are some errors that you want to retry. But once it's all updated, then you can't process these records again, because if you try to run an update, it will give an error that all the records are successfully processed. So for whatever reason, that if you want to load this data again, go ahead and select the file, and then it will be able to do that. So a couple of other things in the input file. So for example, let's say when you load the data and then you want to delete some of the records, right? So you can select these files and then you can say remove selected records. So those records will be deleted from being updated. For example, let's say I'll select this data. It has a fresh loaded. I want to select all the records where it is a blank. Okay, for example. So let's say remove selected records. Okay. And then where it is blank. Okay, so now we just see that, hey, there are two records, two queued and successful, rest of them. And this part account number, I can remove that particular field because some blank value, I want to remove that. And similarly these two, let's say remove selected fields, and then this one as well. Okay, so now we have a proper data. So we have done all the mapping. Okay, so now if we go here, okay, look up ID that is mapped correctly. If we run an update, it should work successfully. Okay, so you can manipulate some of the data before you proceed, or you can after the update, you can use that to correct some of the data. Okay, so this particular three fields that we have, I want to talk a little bit about that. So we add these three fields to indicate kind of to keep track of the status of a particular record. We have a status field that indicates what happened, whether you created, updated, deleted, what have you. And then we have an error. So in case of an error, that will be populated with a value, and the ID column is populated in case of that's important in case of an insert, because that's ID will be generated. So you can use that. And keep in mind, if you export you can export this particular status into a file. You can right click and go to export and follow whatever options available. And when you next time when you load the data, and if this particular fields are there, they will be considered. You can use that to handle some error scenarios. For example, let's say I select a data file one more time, and then I choose the run update as the skip. I go save it. Okay, so there are two errors. So now assume that this particular data, the particular you don't know how to resolve them, that you want to consult with somebody, and let's say you come back later point in time that you want to load that particular data. So now you can just go here, you can open that input file, and then including those columns, status, error, and all that, and then that particular details will be preserved next time, so that when you load it, and it automatically detects that, hey, there is an error, and if you try, it'll update only those two fields. For example, if you go run an update, it'll update only those two, the error ones. So this is about Quick Loader. So there's a lot of capability in a small package in a module. It's pretty feature rich. I hope you guys will be able to take care of it. So there's one last feature that I want to talk about. Here is the configs. Okay, assume that you get a simple file every day from the same vendor that you want to load. You want to do the mapping in a specific way. For example, in this case, this particular field, I want to do external ID mapping. I want to default this and all that, right? So if you next time you get the file, when you load the file, you will have to go and make those changes yourself one more time, right? I mean, this can be inconvenient because you have to do the repeated work, and as well as the error prone because you may make mistakes on the busy of the workday. So the configs allows you to save all of these settings into the file and use it next time. For example, you can go and click on config, and there are options here: new config, use config, update, and the delete, because I've already created a few of them. Let's go and save this particular configuration, whatever that we have, as a new config. So let's say this is the demo config. Okay, so now I'm going to reset, I'm going to refresh the page, okay, so that it'll get initialized to the default one. So if I go here, select this file, the same file that we were loading, you see that, okay, so let's go and select the CSV file. So you see that field mapping is back to the default because that's what it could really do based on the data available. Now I can go here, and then you can say use config, and then you can load the config. So when you do that, you see that all the things have changed. If you go back to the save options, the blank value that I selected is there. And if you go back to the field mapping, the parent key mapping is there. The default value that I've added, it is there. So this is a great way for you to save your time, and then to achieve the repeated loads that you would have to do. Once you, let's say you load a particular config, the current config will be shown here as a demo config. So let's say if you go and save the changes, let's say I want to update 100 at a time, not 200. Now we can go and save that update config. You can say update current config, or you can also click on this update config, demo config. So the next time when you go here, that changes will be preserved. And if you want to delete a config, of course, you can go click here, and then that will delete it. And then I can also delete the other configs. And when there are no configs available, then the only option that will be available is new config. Okay. So this is about a Quick Loader. So as you can see, there's a lot of capability in here, and that can save a lot of time for you, and as well as make it your data loading as easy as possible. Okay. Thank you.